Hello everyone, I'm Oliver Perater, and I'm going to discuss a brief introduction to Immanuel Kant's duty or Deontology ethics. Somehow an overview of his book known as Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, which contains the core ideas of his moral philosophy. As an introduction, this will include discussions on historical background and some important notions contained in the book, specifically his ideas of a priori and a posteriori knowledges, autonomy and heteronomy of the will, his teachings of duty and the goodwill. Immanuel Kant is considered to be the most influential thinker of the modern time. Modern philosophy emerged upon the twilight of medieval thinking. Now, medieval philosophy generally represents the ideals of the Christian feudal society Europe. This was the time when the businessmen were not the wealthiest people in the world. The wealthiest were the people who were lording over thousands and thousands of hectares of lands. They were known as the lords, the counts, and the dukes who commanded thousands of armies. And of course, as the wealthiest, they took control of politics. In fact, some of these lords turned out to become the kings or at the very least, ministers of feudal politics. But the most powerful institution at this period was none other than Christian religion. In fact, this epoch is also known as the Christendom. In general, the life and morality of this period were based on obedience and loyalty. Note that a society whose culture is mainly based on obedience is a society which does not require too much thinking. I am not attacking Christianity here, but I would like to emphasize this one because this is one of the starting points of Kant's moral philosophy. Now, a feudal society had self-sufficient economy. It means they had economy which was enough for itself. They had everything they needed within the kingdom. The product they had were the same products produced by most other kingdoms. Therefore, export and import of goods and services were not that vital. And of course, businessmen could not flourish the way they do today. Kingdoms generally live in isolation. And isolated economy would also mean isolated mindset. People did not know too much about other kingdoms. But everything started to change during the epoch known as the Mercantilist Period. Like spices from India, silk from China, blue-colored pigments from Afghanistan were just few of the luxurious commodities of the time. It was when European merchants started to flourish and little by little established economic power. But these merchants did not only traded goods and services. They also consequently traded information as well. Different cultures and traditions, different religious belief, different ideals, different sets of moral standards, different cuisines, and all sorts of lifestyle from many parts of the world had also become talk of the town in Europe. Now, this epoch drastically changed the mindset of the European world that led to Italian Renaissance and the Age of Reason or Enlightenment. It was when the new breed of thinkers started to emerge and question the political and religious practices of obedience, loyalty, and absolute power of authorities. In general, Age of Enlightenment was an invitation to use our minds and our senses instead of simply rolling over on commands and imposed rules. The ideas were spread that in general, people also possess intelligence and are fully capable of decision making as much as the lords, the kings, and church leaders. Therefore, people's opinion and political decisions must also be respected. In Kant's ideas, it was the Copernican revolution of mindsets. Instead of simply following rules from the outside imposed on the self, one has to acknowledge the power emanating from within the self, because humans have the intrinsic power from within. In his essay, An Answer to the Question, What is Enlightenment? Kant invites people to go back to the self, use one's own reason, and stop relying too much on someone else's guidance. In the first paragraph, he says, Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's own understanding without the guidance of another. This immaturity is self-incurred if its cause is not lack of understanding, but lack of resolution and courage to use it without the guidance of another. The motto of enlightenment is therefore sapere aude. Have courage to use your own understanding. Kant synthesized the early modern rationalism and empiricism. Both of these schools of thought are outcomes of the age of enlightenment, and both had generated ideas and principles that run in contrary with the reigning feudal religious teachings. In general, rationalism, represented by René Descartes, argues that knowledge can only be acquired with the use of pure reason or pure thinking, without the aid of the senses. Meaning, Descartes believed that we do not need our senses in order to know the truth. While empiricism, represented by George Berkeley, John Locke, and David Hume, claims that all knowledge is derived from sense experience, that is, no knowledge can ever be acquired or produced without the use of at least one of our senses. Now, while the debate between rationalism and empiricism progressed, Kant intervened, claiming that both are just two sides of the same coin, and that there is a knowledge that can only be acquired after experience with the aid of the senses. But there is also a knowledge which can be acquired prior to experience using only pure reason. These knowledges are classified as a priori and a posteriori. A posteriori knowledge is a knowledge acquired after experience. All scientific knowledge produced from experiments are examples of knowledge that belong to this category, because these knowledges are impossible to achieve without experience and without the aid of the senses. Now, for instance, we know colors because we see colors, such as blue or red. And anyone who were born blind would never have any idea what colors are. And this is an example of knowledge a posteriori. Again, it is a knowledge that we acquire after experience, and those who cannot experience them can never know them. But not all knowledge is acquired a posteriori. There is also a knowledge that can only be acquired prior to experience or a priori. That is knowledge which could be known by pure reason or pure thinking, devoid of any sensual experience. Like pure mathematical equations and numbers. Numbers can neither be seen nor touched. Number 3, for example, can be expressed in so many ways like this. And the verbal word three, tulo or tatlo. But these are nothing but symbols of the idea of number 3 that exist only in the mind. All of these are nothing but representations of the idea of number 3. Numbers are abstract and do not exist in space and time. Numbers then were not discovered through the senses but by means of a priori grounds. And Kant asserts that the principles of morality can only be known by a priori grounds, just like numbers and pure mathematical equations. How do we know that telling a lie and not keeping promises are morally wrong? And how do we know that helping people and giving alms are morally good? In Kant's teaching, one does not need experience in order to learn these moral principles. We could know their moral worth from the inner core of our beings. In the grounding, Kant argues that all moral concepts have their seat and origin completely a priori in reason. They cannot be abstracted from any empirical and hence merely contingent cognition. We could learn them by ourselves because as rational beings, internally we have the capacity to know the principles of morality a priori. This means that the knowledge of the principles of morality can only be acquired a priori, just like pure mathematical equations. If you are capable of knowing the principles of morality a priori, then it implies that you can be a good person even if no one is telling you what to do and what you should not be doing. Human intellect is capable of knowing right and wrong even without imposed rules. And since every rational could possess the knowledge of the principles of morality a priori, then it follows that human beings deserve to exercise autonomy of the will. That is, I must be my own master. I don't have to be told what to do, since by virtue by being rational, I have internal capacity to know what is right and wrong. Thus, human does not need anyone's law or dictate in order to know and do the good. Autonomy of the will is when the will in performing good deeds is free from any dictates of external influences such as orders and rewards. Contrary to this is the heteronomy of the will. It is when someone's will is imposed on you in doing actions and choices, making you unable to act according to your own will. We have distinguished two types of will, the autonomy of the will and the heteronomy of the will. Kant also identifies two types of imperatives, the categorical and hypothetical imperatives. Imperative means law. Categorical imperative is a law that the self has crafted only for itself, not influenced by external motives or commands. Kant teaches that we can be our own lawmakers. This law, or this is a law we craft without external influences such as commands or rewards that one may get out of doing good deeds. This means also that we do good for goodness sake, and it is unconditional. We do good without expecting anything in return. Any law that does not subscribe to this principle of legislation is hypothetical imperative. In Kant's idea, categorical imperative is the only source of authentic morality, while hypothetical imperative is the source of unscrupulous or fake morality. Because hypothetical imperative is a law that others made for you, or a law that you made but out of the influence of external forces, that consequently make your good actions unattributed to you. Hypothetical imperative is conditional. It obliges rational beings to do good for certain conditions. While categorical imperatives are unconditional laws. They could be obeyed without conditions. That is, regardless of your status, sexual preference, gender, situations, and existential conditions. I utter the word obeyed, but this obedience in Kant's moral teaching is not emanating from the rule of external authorities. If we have to follow rules, then it must only be the rule of reason. Kant says, this duty, prior to all experience, is contained as a duty in general in the idea of a reason that determines the will by means of a priori grounds. The idea is do good not because you are being told, not because you want to be in heaven someday, not because it makes you happy, not because it will give you reward or excuses you from punishment, not because it is your nature or inclination to do good. You do good because it is what you ought to do. Gagawa ka ng mabuti dahil yan ang nararapat mong gawin. It is your duty imposed by your own reason and goodwill. Do good and avoid evil, even if it will give you undesirable outcome, and even if you are going to hell. In this sense, Kant is directly confronting the ideas of divine command theory, Aristotle's virtue ethics, St. Thomas' natural law theory, and even utilitarianism. In the grounding, Kant says, there is no possibility of thinking of anything at all in the world, or even out of it, which can be regarded as good without qualification, except a good will. For Kant, the highest good is not pleasure, not happiness, not even happiness with God, but the goodwill. It is the only thing that is good in itself. Goodwill can be translated into Tagalog as mabuting kalooban, from its root word loob, which literally means inside or internal. In Cebuano, goodwill could be translated as maayong kabubuton, from the word buot. Buot could mean intelligence, while at the same time, it is also the root word for buutan, which means a good person. Helping people in need, almsgiving, and saving lives are not good in themselves. Good and bad people alike could also do all of this, but only some could do this without external motives and influences. What is important is not really the action, but the motive behind the action, the goodwill. Kant says, for when moral value is being considered, the concern is not with the actions, which are seen, but rather with their inner principles, which are not seen. Thank you very much. I hope this is good enough to get you acquainted with Kant's moral notions. And have a nice day and keep safe. Once again, thank you.